Welcome back to AP World History Modern Test Prep for Unit 2. I'm going to do the best that I can do to sum up all those hours sitting in class and reading your textbook and whatever else you did and try to sum it up into some big ideas to help you be successful on the AP test. So Unit 2 refers to the exact same time period as Unit 1, 1200 to 1450. All those states that we learned about from the last video are still here in this time period because it's the same time period. But now we're going to look through this with a different lens, the lens of interaction and trade between those empires, instead of just looking at the political and government makeup of state building. So let's start out with a little bit of context. Remember, context is explaining how we got here. So the major states during this time for us to remember are this. We have decentralized Europe, living in feudal states. The Byzantine Empire is still holding on to control of Constantinople as the former Eastern Roman Empire. If we travel to the Middle East, we have the fragmenting Abbasid Empire that is declining. And then if we look at some other areas, we have the empires of Mali in West Africa, Great Zimbabwe in Southeast Africa. We have the Delhi Sultanate in northern India, which again is an Islamic empire. And in the south, we have a major Hindu people of the Vijayanagar. So, as we continue on then and look at Southeast Asia, we would find Srivijaya and Majapahit who are controlling trade and making lots of money in that adventure. Song Dynasty is in China, which, as we would say, is the happening place during this time due to successful commercial activities and innovations. Across the Pacific Ocean and disconnected from the Afro-Eurasian Party is the impressive empires of the Aztecs and the Inca. So what do you need to know for Unit 2? You must know the similarities and the differences between the three major trade routes that are going on during this period and what the effects of those connections are. Be sure to stick around to the end of this video to look as we'll kind of make some comparisons between these different trade routes, specifically how to make those claims and demonstrate support with evidence in a fancy method known as the ACE method. So let's jump to Unit 2 review, starting with the basics of the three trade routes. Grab again that pen and paper, marker, crayons, paints, whatever it takes, okay? You want to take some notes. Be sure to use the pause button if you need to and jot down these things. I know I'm a social studies teacher, but science tells us that note-taking helps create kind of a new pathway in the brain and helps you kind of encode that information in a way that stores it up here into your long-term memory. Now, long-term remembering is what you want and what you need to be successful on the AP exam. So, break out those things, take those notes, make those new pathways, and encode that information. So trade route number 1 is the Silk Road Network. Now the Silk Road Network is a series of networks that connected China to the Middle East and even to Europe. It is named after one of its first major high-demand goods, silk. Now silk was traded between the Han Dynasty in China all the way to the Roman Empire in Europe in the classical period, and utilized the previously existing Persian Empire's royal road system in the Middle East. Now, in the period of Unit 2, around the year 1200, we are looking at the trade by the Song Dynasty in China and how it's connected to other empires like the Abbasid Empire, the Seljuk Turks, and even the existing Byzantine Empire. Now, this is mostly an east-west overland trade route that we are looking at for the Silk Road. With improved commercial practices, there became an increase in the volume of trade and expanded the geographic range of the existing trade routes, which led to a birth of new powerful trading cities. People simply could not go from Song, China, all the way to the Middle East. I did a little Google mapping and was trying to see how far that mileage would be. And again, I'm in the United States, and it said basically that's not possible to do in miles, but it would take a 20-hour flight. Now, that's a long way, and I think you get the point. People couldn't carry goods that far. There are not some super ultra marathoners that would do it. So new cities were born, and they were stop points for merchants to trade goods along the way. Now, key cities in the Silk Road would be Kashgar in modern-day China, Samarkand in Central Asia, and my favorite is Dunhuang, which is in modern-day China as well. Now, these cities grew because of trade, much like how the empires of Srivijaya grew due to trade. Merchants would travel through them, and they needed rest stops or a place to stay. They also needed to buy and sell their goods. With this need, boom, you have cities, or in this case, new cities that emerged because of trade. Now, with every trade route, I would like you to remember 3 key things for every single one. What goods were exchanged, what religion spread due to trade, and what technology helped with the trading on that route. Now, with the Silk Road, the major trade goods included silk and porcelain from China. You also would have gunpowder and rice and tea and precious stones. Now, going from the Middle East to China along the route, you would see olive oil and gold and silver, fruits, glassware, rugs, like Persian rugs, and animals like horses. The major religion that spread along the Silk Road by far would be Buddhism. If you were traveling along and went to that trading city I mentioned before, Dunhuang, in modern-day China, you would see these huge Buddhist monasteries and sculptures carved into the mountains in China of the Buddha. Now remember, Buddhism was an Indian religion, and we see that it was spread along this route and into China due to, once again, trade, missionaries, merchants, and the Silk Road network. The growth of interregional trade, especially in regard to luxury goods, was encouraged due to new innovations that helped with better transport. New saddles and stirrups for horses allowed for better transport, along with the formation of caravanserai, which were places where merchants could stop, rest up, refuel, and then continue on. There are also advancements in money economies. So new banking establishments were formed. The idea of paper money, also known as flying cash, as well as new forms of credit, promoted more trade. One important thing to always remember when thinking about trade, it is driven by supply and demand. Without going all Econ 101 on you, just think of it as this. New products that come on the market. If there's, let's say, a new phone or a game system or sporting event where there is a lot of demand for whatever they are providing, that will drive the prices up if there's a low supply of that item or service. People then turn to the marketplace, eBay, Amazon, StubHub to pay private sellers significantly more than you would in the stores. Now, if there's a high supply, the cost typically will decrease. The reality was that during this time period of 1200 to 1450, there was an increasing demand for luxury goods, which made the Chinese, Persians, and Indian artisans super successful as they expanded their production for export purposes. All right, on to trade route number 2, the Indian Ocean Network. Now, the Indian Ocean Network was a series of sea routes, and you guessed it, the Indian Ocean. Now, it obviously included India, but also the Swahili city-states along the east coast of Africa. and more inland states that we've talked about before, like Great Zimbabwe. It also included the Arabian Peninsula, Southeast Asian states like Srivijaya and later Majapahit, and then Song Dynasty in China. Now, a major difference compared to the Silk Road would be the water-based nature, allowing for a significantly higher amount of goods that could be traded, and the literal size of those goods. You could move timber very easily on a ship, which would be very difficult, if you can imagine, on a horse or on a camel. Now, the tricky part of the Indian Ocean network was that it relied on traveling with the monsoon winds. You didn't want to be on a ship traveling against the wind, which would be very inefficient and, quite frankly, quite dangerous with the technology that was available at this time. Now, the winds would push ships towards India in the summer months, and they would push it towards Africa in the winter. As with the Silk Road, new powerful trading cities emerged. Most famous from Unit 1 was the Empire of Srivijaya, which again used the Strait of Malacca to tax merchants who were traveling through as they were going to new places, especially between India and going to China and China back to India. Cities in India like Calicut also emerged as they became emporia locations where many goods were exchanged as kind of like this middle ground between Africa and China. Along the east coast of Africa, you would find new city-states that emerged like Kilwa or Mozambique or Mogadishu that were coastal cities that exported items from the interior of Africa and put them into this Indian Ocean network. So let's review the 3 must-knows about trade in the Indian Ocean. With the Indian Ocean, the major trade goods that you absolutely must know is spices, spices, spices. All about the spices. Now, we're going to circle back to this idea when we talk about exploration coming up in some future units. But there are a lot of spices that are from this very region. Black pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, cloves. You must remember, especially to Europeans, that the value that spices added to their very bland food. You will also in this network will have iron and ivory and animal skins that are coming from Africa, and the same trade goods around China that we see in the Silk Road, like silk and porcelain. Now, the major religion that spread along the Indian Ocean was Buddhism, as it was a universal religion. Hinduism also spread, but mostly because people who were Hindu just literally moved and migrated to a new area. Likewise, Islam will spread in this region via Islamic merchants, which again is another universal religion that seeks converts, and due to the Arabian Peninsula's location directly on this route, will spread Islam to the region. This explains why you will find Buddhist temples in Srivijaya and mosques later in the kingdom of Majapahit. Now, new innovations could also ensure goods could be transported better along the sea routes. The compass was very important, as well as the astrolabe that helps sailors find their position on the sea and project distances. The understanding of the monsoon winds ensured regularly scheduled trips, and ships that also helped along with this would be the Chinese junk ship and the Indian dhow ship. So we got 2 routes down, 1 to go. Let's go to our 3rd trade route, TransSaharan Trade. Now, the Trans-Sahara trade route was across the Sahara in northern Africa. It connected those West African kingdoms to the Middle East. In the period, once again, 1200 to 1450 in Unit 2, we are looking at trade between Mali and those in the Middle East, such as, once again, the fragmenting Abbasid Empire and the Mamluk empires. It was a mostly east-west overland trade route. Now, the trickiest part of this trade route was the harshness of the Sahara Desert. For a long time, technologically, it couldn't even happen until people realized the gift of the camel. You see, horses simply could not survive across the desert without water. It stranded both the horse and the horse rider, or merchant in this case. Now add in the addition of the saddle and the stirrup and the camel, and boom, a trans-Sahara trade possible. Caravans, or groups of merchants who traveled together across the desert and made this exchange possible. Here also were new powerful trading cities that emerged. Most famous from Unit 1 was the emergence of Timbuktu in Mali as a center of Islamic learning, as well as cities like Walata and Jenny. The major trade good here, without a doubt, would be salt. Salt was so critical before refrigeration to preserve and flavor food, and literal, huge slabs of it were tied to camels, and then they would trek across the desert. You should look that up sometime. Now, gold was also found in this region and was very plentiful. Cloth also became a major trade commodity, as was ivory from regions to the south. The major religion that spread throughout the Trans-Sahara Trade network across northern Africa was most certainly Islam. And as we recall, it was during this time that Mansa Musa from Mali took the Hajj with a gigantic caravan all the way to Cairo in Egypt and then on to Mecca. He alone would be the easiest person to remember from this trade route, as it alerts you to all three things that we were talking about that you must know about a trade route. Fantastic evidence if you could write about it. Goods, the gold that was dispersed through Egypt that inflated the economy, technology using the camel caravan, and lastly, religion, Islam, as he was fulfilling the fifth pillar of Islam, taking the Hajj to Mecca. All three major things that you must know summed up into one person, Mansa Musa. So put that in the notebook and into your brain. You gotta know that. All right, so let's move on to another major thing in Unit 2. What are the impacts or consequences of Afro-Eurasia being so connected with these trade routes? We will look at how it impacted the environment, and we will look at how it impacted culture. All right, so the first thing you have to know as major impacts is the spread of religion, or in AP speak, diffusion of religion. We see that Islam spread throughout the Indian Ocean and the Trans-Sahara routes. Christianity spread throughout the Mediterranean trade routes and some parts of the Silk Road. Buddhism spread in the Indian Ocean and most famously spread along the Silk Road into China, which then later spread to Japan. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam are all universalizing religions, meaning they seek converts. People can convert to those religions. And often they provided more opportunities for women and people who maybe had a lower social status in their society. Second effect, the spread of technology. Not only did technological innovations make trade easier and more efficient, other technologies spread as well. Gunpowder would probably be the most important technological good that moved from China along the Silk Road into the Middle East. Now, we will see in the next period how important and history-altering this technology will become. Another effect, spread of travelers and knowledge. Remember, post-Crusades, not only did goods travel back to Europe, but also with it, knowledge. The academic works that were maintained and built upon in the Middle East found their way back to Europe, and then in the future will lead to major changes like the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution, and eventually will lead on to exploration. Now, these events would not have been possible without the key learnings that were preserved in the Middle Eastern Islamic empires, specifically in Baghdad with the House of Wisdom. Plus, there was a variety of travelers who chronicled their travels, like Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta. Here's another one, crops. Crops spread to new regions and helped grow population while also altering their local environments. And now another effect is disease. This is more of a downfall to interconnection, the spread of disease. I'm not sure how much I need to prove this fact to you, as many of you have now experienced the quick spread of the coronavirus. And we now understand germ theory today. During the 1300s, we see the Black Death wreak havoc across Afro-Eurasia. Thanks to the Silk Road superhighway, not only did goods move, but so did disease. The plague arrived in Europe in October of 1347, and it is estimated that over the next 5 years, it would kill more than 20 million people just in Europe. Now, people started to stay away from people who were sick and stay in their homes. This video is thanks to that. Today's word for that is quarantine, but back then they had no idea why it was spreading. Most people believed that God was upset and punishing them so that they sought after forgiveness, or maybe they just tried to literally flee from an area, which only spread to it more. If only they understood social distancing. The last part of review for Unit 2 is understanding the Mongolian Empire. Why did this one state not make the cut for Unit 1? My theory is probably because of how interconnected the Mongols were to trade. Now, the Mongolian Empire was founded by Genghis Khan as he united and conquered regions of Central Asia in 1206. So that is really at the beginning of this time period of 1200. The Mongols will conquer 3 major regions outside of Central Asia. They'll conquer China, Russia, and the Middle East, and these areas will become their khanates. In China, they conquered the Song dynasty, and they established a new dynasty known as the Yuan dynasty. One of the grandsons of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, will take the role of Emperor of China and claimed the Mandate of Heaven. Things were less harsh in China, where there was little more religious tolerance, we'll say. And he helped add to their existing infrastructure in China. Like, he helped build better roads. They also imported foreigners from the Arabian Peninsula and the Arab world and even Russia. Sometimes some even said, like, Europe, people like Marco Polo came in, and some of these people would work in the government positions, as they had a very large bureaucracy in China. And that was something that was not very familiar to Mongolian ways. Later, they attempted to conquer neighboring areas in Southeast Asia like Vietnam and Majapahit, but were unsuccessful at doing so. In the Middle East, the Mongols advanced on the region militarily, led by a different grandson, Hulagu. He told the Caliph al-Mustasim, who was the political and the religious leader at that time, to surrender to their forces. Mustasim refused and challenged them to come take the city. Well, they did, and it didn't turn out so good for him. In fact, they rolled him up, the Caliph, they rolled him up in a carpet and trampled him with their horses. They took the city decisively, and this marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age in Baghdad. After conquering it, they were less familiar with ruling the vast administrative systems established in the former Islamic Empire. They actually allowed many Persians to work in different government jobs, despite the fact that initially their horses ruined much of their fragile local geography due to overgrazing. So that was kind of a problem. Mongol rule in Russia looked the most different, mostly due to the fact of their geography in Russia. The land was simply not friendly to the nomadic lifestyle of the Mongols, with their harsh winters, like in Wisconsin, unlike what the weather was like in China and the Middle East. So instead, the Mongols ruled the Golden Horde indirectly by extracting tribute and taxes from the Russian princes. Later, Ivan the Great will stop paying the Mongols, but until then, they were in submission to them in an economic way, despite the Mongols not settling in Russia. The Mongols became the largest contiguous land empire in history, with their homeland in Central Asia and these 3 khanates. Due to this conquest, most of the Silk Road network was overseen by a single political entity. This era was known as the Pax Mongolica, or Mongolian Peace, which helped promote peace and stability throughout these territories during an era when the Mongols were very active. Under the protection of these laws, the commercial routes were safe from external threats. It also allowed that superhighway, the Silk Road, to move a significant amount of goods and, of course, move disease as well. So with that, that's the major content that you must know. But just stay here. We're going to move on to the comparison making. One of the short answer questions I had my students write about this year asked them to answer this prompt. Identify and explain one similarity between a trade route in Afro-Eurasia. Now, I like to use the ACE strategy. It stands for this. A means answer the question, C means cite evidence, and E, explain how your evidence supports your claim. How do you do this? Answer the question by literally rewording the prompt. Take that question as your sentence starter. For example, one similarity between, insert your actual trade routes, were blank. For example, one similarity between Silk Road and TransSaharan Trade networks was the emergence of new trading cities. That's our claim. Then the C part of ACE, cite specific examples or evidence. And then E means to explain. In this case, name the cities that were on the trade routes to prove that new cities emerged. So you need to know specifics to do well on the SAQ portion. So here's an example. One similarity between the Silk Road and TransSaharan Trade networks was the emergence of new trading cities. There's our claim. Now we need evidence. The cities of Timbuktu in Mali, Kashgar, Dunhuang in China were important new cities that were built due to increasing trade. Merchants needed places to stop and sleep for the night, along with trade goods, as they engaged in commercial activities. Or you could do this as well as a comparison. Another similarity between the Silk Road and Trans-Sahara and Indian Ocean networks were they all spread religions. Now that's the claim. C is citing evidence to prove it. So now we're going to explain examples. While Buddhism spread from India along the Silk Road into China, Islam spread along the Trans-Sahara routes and the Indian Ocean routes, showing that not only goods traveled along trade routes, but also did religion. Or how about this other comparison? Another similarity between Silk Road, Trans-Sahara, and Indian Ocean networks was that they all spread religions. That's the claim. Now we need to cite examples to prove that it's true. While Buddhism spread from India along the Silk Road into China, Islam spread along the Trans-Sahara routes and Indian Ocean routes, showing that not only goods traveled along trade routes, but so did religion. The explain portion lets you analyze and show how the evidence proves the claim. You can also fashion a claim that seems like a similarity into a difference. Yes, it's true that luxury goods were traded on all the routes, or the fact that both the Saharan and Silk routes were both overland. Now, each of these claims falls into the, well, no duh claims, the obvious claims. You want something a little more sophisticated. So here's a way that you could change that up. While luxury goods were exchanged on the Silk Road, Trans-Saharan trade included the exchange of necessary commodities. Then we're going to go on and cite evidence to prove that claim. Silk and porcelain were traded along the Silk Road, along with desired Persian rugs in the Middle East. However, salt was a necessary commodity from Mali, which was necessary for food preservation and flavoring. Or you could spice up that no kidding claim of overland routes and sea routes, like you probably don't want to write this. While the Silk Road and Trans-Sahara were similar in that they were overland routes, the Indian Ocean was a sea-based route. Perhaps discuss instead technology and make this a more in-depth claim, like this. While the Silk Road and Trans-Sahara routes used similar technologies due to the fact that they were overland routes, the Indian Ocean increased shipping capacity as a sea-based route. Evidence then in your answer could include things about the camels, or stirrups, or saddles to prove that Silk Road and Trans-Sahara were similar in their technologies, and how in the Indian Ocean they were different using ships like the dhow ship or the junk ships, and how they could carry more goods because of them being sea-based. Well, I hope this helped sum up major content from Unit 2, as we looked at trade connections and the Mongols also worked on acing the SAQ section. Be sure to check out the rest of the unit videos to prep for your AP exam. Hit the subscribe button below. Stay tuned for all the future videos that are coming out. Good luck, and we'll see you next time.